We are here today to talk about the IDA 2 training. My name is Sam Smith. I've been here for about 19 years. Kristen and I have been doing this training for about 17 years. So today we're just going to walk through the IDA 2, how to administrate it, all the different kind of, intricacies of the assessment, and then we'll have it open for questions at the end.
Okay, I'm Kristen Lenardi, and I've been here for about 17 years, and as Sam says, we've been doing this assessment, and we're going to go into talking about the outcomes. I'm going to have Sam start with that.
So today the outcomes of our training are just to explore the process of assessment, what that means, how we do that, talk about the materials that are part of the IDA itself, just kind of being aware of the protocol, how it works. It's a little bit different than other assessments that are used, and then also just how to score it and why why we have to know how to score it and what we use those scores for.
Okay, so with assessment, the assessment starts the minute you walk in the door. So you knock on the door and the parents answer the door. You're going to get a lot just from the very first steps that you take into the house. You want to see, how does the child come to greet you? Is the child going and hiding behind mommy and daddy? Is the child walking to you? Are they scooting? It starts the minute you walk in the door. So just be aware of that it's immediately starting when you walk in. You want to trust your knowledge of child development. So as you look through some of the protocol, you'll see a lot of these are pretty straightforward child development, and just trust your knowledge of that and when typical skills are happening at typical stages of development. And you want to make sure you ask open-ended questions versus yes or no questions. So instead of saying, does your child use a spoon, you could say, how does your child use a spoon, so you can get more information on how they are using the spoon while they're eating, those kind of things. So you want to look at making sure that you ask open-ended questions instead of yes or no questions.
So the IDA 2, since it's been updated, is a comprehensive assessment that was developed by several clinicians from different areas that specialize in child development, neurological development, family and interaction. And it differs from typical birth to 3 assessments because it's a family-centered assessment. So even if you don't see a child do one of the activities that you're looking for, you still can give them credit. If the parent says, oh, he usually does that, or I've seen him do that before, you can give them some credit for that versus some of the other standardized assessments that are used are very black and white. So if the child doesn't do it the way they're supposed to do it right then when you ask them to do it, you can't give them credit. This allows for a little more flexibility, which matches with the idea of early start and being family-centered. It allows the parents to be part of the assessment process, which is really important. It is also based on, I kind of just said that, but we're looking at all 8 domains, and so I will talk about those domains in a minute, but it's kind of the whole child and the whole family is being taken into consideration. So your IDA bag will look something like this. And it will have all sorts of toys. Every bag looks a little different, but what should be in each bag, I'm just going to read this real quick. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it. We'll do more face-to-face with it as well. But there should be 2 rattles, 1 small ball, kind of like a tennis ball, 1 squeaky toy, usually it's a rubber ducky, some paper, a pull toy with a string, usually it's a little dog that you walk. There should be a solid screen, just like a piece of wood basically. It looks like the back of a clipboard without the clip part. There's a piece of felt in there. There's a baby doll. Those all look very different. There's some picture cards, which we'll look at later. There should be like a small car, a bell, a form board, which is basically a puzzle, a small bottle, which is like a pill bottle is what it looks like. So not like a baby bottle, but like a pill bottle. There's a bigger ball, but it's not significantly bigger than the small ball, so keep that in mind. There should be some crayons. There should be some beads and a string for stringing them. There should be 10 1-inch cubes like this. A large cup and a small cup. Again, the size variation between large and small is not significant. There should be some child safety scissors. And then there's also some items for naming, such as a pencil that's typically not sharpened, a key, and a spoon for eating. And then there'll be like the little candy pellets, which you'll see in a little bit when we start the assessment process. The domains that are covered by the IDA are gross motor, fine motor, relationship to inanimate objects, which is what we call cognitive. So that's where we would put that information on the IFSP. Language, both receptive and expressive language, self-help, relationship to persons, which is social, emotions and feeling states, and then coping, which is more of the adaptive types of skills. And now we're going to kind of go step by step into those domains in more detail, and Kristen will start that.
Okay, so the first domain that we're going to talk about is the gross motor domain. And gross motor skills are the large muscles, things like walking, running, climbing, crawling, throwing a ball, gross motor skills, involving large muscles. If you want to take a look at your manual, it breaks up every domain. Right now we're going to be referring to the gross motor skills domain, which is GM in the manual. GM, gross motor skills. And some of the things that I want to refer to are some of the ones that are kind of tricky. I'll kind of go through each one. Here is the scoring sheet that we use when you're assessing for each developmental domain. And you want to open up your booklet, and you'll see to the far left-hand side of the booklet is the gross motor domain. So we'll talk about the gross motor domain now. And to the very left, you'll see the age scores between 1 to 2 months, 2 to 4, 4 to 7, and so on until it gets to the scoring piece, which we'll get to at the very end. Okay, so let's start with some of the gross motor points, some of the ones that are kind of get tricky. Some of the main ones are the difference between crawling and creeping, that it's actually the opposite of what you may think. Creeping is actually when the child is put on their tummy, can creep for several feet on hands and knees with trunk raised from the floor. And the extremities must be moved in a reciprocal or cross-pattern fashion. So that sounds like crawl, but for purposes of the IDA assessment in the gross motor, it's defined as creep. Where crawling on the belly is crawling at least a foot using upper and lower extremities to help propel self. The standing alone domain is for 15 seconds or more. So if you ask the parent, does your child stand alone, and they stand for 2 seconds and fall down, that doesn't count. They need to be able to stand alone for 15 seconds to get credit in that category. Sometimes it's helpful to kind of count while they're up and make it fun. 1, 2, 3, yay, you got to 15. So they get credit. Casting in the gross motor domain is with the ball. So the ball that's in your IDA kit. It's a voluntary timed release in the direction of a chosen target or site. So they might kind of just go like this, and it's to you, that counts as casting. The criteria will change in some of the older age ranges. 12.1 is walking a few steps alone. So they call the definition and the criteria for that is to take 3 steps without falling. So another thing you can kind of count. If the parent says, oh, they're walking a few steps, but they just take 1 step and fall, it doesn't count. They have to be able to take 3 steps without falling. In 14.1, hurling the ball. Now this is different than the casting of the ball. The hurling the ball is not simply tossing in the general direction. It's an aimed full arm movement using your shoulder and your elbow. You're hurling the ball. 17.2 jumps off the floor with both feet. So if they are kind of galloping and taking their feet and doing this, that doesn't count as a jump. They have to be able to jump off the ground and down, and you can model that for them. You can I'd say, can you do this? And you jump and see if they model it for you. One of the other points that you want to be aware of around the 24 to 30-month age range, and the item number is 19.1, you're going to want to ask the parents, does your child walk on tiptoes after demonstration? And sometimes that may alarm parents because they may think that that is associated with autism, and that they may think that you're asking, are you concerned that your child may have a diagnosis of autism? It's important to reassure them that that is a skill that you typically see in the 24 to 30-month age range, and that we see children do that. That's a typical skill that we see at that age, and that we're not necessarily saying that their child has a diagnosis of autism. And the item number for that is 19.1, and you'll see that in the book, in the black squares. You'll see that the item number's 19.1. And then the last area to be looking at in the gross motor domain is balancing on one foot, and that's item number 20.1 in the gross motor manual. And the criteria for that is that the child can stand on their foot for 1 to 2 seconds, and they would get credit for that. They have to be able to do it on each foot, so do it on the right foot and then do it on the left foot. They could also be holding on to a piece of furniture while they do that, and that will count as being mastering that category and getting credit for that. Next, we're going to move to fine motor skills, and fine motor is that eye-hand coordination. We're going to talk about some of the key questions to be aware of, and one of them is on item 2.1 on holding the toy actively. It's while the child is briefly holding the rattle while on his back. On item number 3, the child should retain the rattle in their hand and looking at it while they're on their back. So that's the difference between item number 2.1 and item number 3. In number 3, they're actually looking at it, where in 2.1, they're just briefly holding it. On item number 4 in the fine motor domain, we're looking at grasping the rattle near the hand. So you offer the rattle in midline and observe as they try to reach for it. So while they're on their back, the baby's on their back, you're going to offer them the rattle. If they try to reach for it, then they get credit for that in item number 4. Okay, on number 4, on item number 4.1, 5, 6, and 8, we're going to be looking at the grasping patterns.
It's going to be above.
It's going to be And so there's different ways of grasping the block. So one of the ways is to grasp the cube precariously, and that's more like this. Grasping the cube with a palmar grasp is more kind of like this. Grasping the cube with a radial palmar grasp is like this. And then grasping the cube with a radial digital grasp is like this. And so the child will get credit based off how they're holding that cube. So it's helpful to bring the picture of these grasping sequences with you. These are all in your manual. In item number 5.1 in the fine motor domain, this criteria is also involving the rattle. We use the rattle a lot in those early fine motor domain, and you'll see a lot of that, different ways to hold the rattle. And this one on 5.1, they have to be able to hold the rattle for 1 minute while they're on their back. So just holding onto it and letting go, they will not get credit for that in item number 5.1. They have to be able to hold it for 1 minute. Okay, and the next items, item number 7, 8.1, 9, and 10, we're looking at the finger grasp patterns. You'll see that in your book, your manual right here, in the finger grasp patterns. So there's different ways of grasping. What we're looking to see them grasp is a pellet. Sometimes if the family, I like to always say before I even offer this to the family, this is just a sugar candy pellet. Are you okay if I present this to your child? I will do my best to try to see that they don't eat it. Are they okay if they accidentally eat it? If they say, oh, I don't want them to eat it, maybe you could say, do you have any Cheerios in the house or little puffs or something that's similar to this to use for this exercise? So the first item on fine motor number 7 is, do they rake the pellet? And just to make it a little bit easier, I'm going to put it on my hand right now. Do they rake the pellet? That's the raking. To grasping the pellet with whole hands or scissors grasp is more like like this. Grasping the pellet with inferior pincer grasp is more like that. And then grasping with a neat pincer grasp is more like that. That's fine motor number 10, neat pincer grasp. Okay. On item number 11, on trying to build the cube tower, you want to do this on a tabletop. You could do it on a table if you happen to have the board that's in your bag. You could use that, and while you're sitting on the floor with the child, and put the child could be in the parent's lap if you need to, or they could be sitting on the floor with you. On trying to build the cube tower, even if they don't successfully put the cube on top of the cube, if they try, they're going to get credit for that on number 11. So even if they do this, but they're trying, and it falls, they're going to get credit for that. That's on number 11. On item number 11-2, this is involving the ball, and this is where you're looking to see if they release the ball with a slight cast voluntarily. Releasing the ball rather than just dropping it. So if you present them with the ball and they just, if you present them, I'll use this ball, and they just drop it like that, that doesn't count. They have to actually release it with a slight cast. So the child sees you and they kind of just go like this. They kind of if they have a slight cast when they're trying to get the direction of you, then they will get credit for that. On item number 12, scribbling with crayon, and you'll see in your manual that there's different examples of scribbling with the crayon. So I would present the child with the crayon, and you may want to do it first, and you might want to say scribble, and then give them the crayon and see if they imitate a scribble. On item number 13, placing the pellet in the bottle. So the bottle is this bottle right here. It looks different in many of the bags. Some are like an old medicine pill bottle. And you want to see if they can place the pellet in the bottle with the rounded side down. So you want to pick it up and put it in the bottle. If they do that, they're going to get credit on fine motor number 13. Okay, on item number 13.1, now we're looking at building towers with the blocks. And without help, they need to build a tower of 2 cubes to get credit on the item number 13.1 in the fine motor domain. So you put one out, and sometimes you can model it for the child. You could say, look, build the tower, and give that to them. And if they do this, they're going to get credit. On item 16.1, execute circles. Again, we'll go back to the manual. This gives examples of what a pass is and what a fail is with circles. So some of these, as you can see, don't look quite like a circle, but per this manual and the scoring protocol, these count as mastering the circle and getting credit for the circle. And in this domain, they're not, that's a fail. So even if they're kind of trying to make a kind of a circular motion, as you see here, they will get credit for that. On item number 17, holds crayon with fingers. We are looking for the fingers and thumb rather than a fist. If you give them the crayon and they're doing this, they're not going to get credit for that. So they have to use a fingers and thumb rather than a fist to get credit in item number 17. On item 17.2, this talks about the different strokes making with the crayon. So you want to see if they'll make vertical and horizontal strokes with the crayon. And again, if you look back at the manual, you'll see some examples. This would be a pass, and these would be a fail. These are passes, and those are fails. So some of those look real similar to these, as you can see. So it's helpful to bring your manual with you when you're learning, just to kind of take it with you. And the parents, you could just say, I'm just referring to my manual as I'm scoring. Parents will generally will not ask you questions why you're referring to your manual. I used to take mine with me all the time when I was learning. It's very helpful to have this with you so you can get some ideas on what is a pass and what is a fail.
Parents don't know you're not supposed to have the manual with you, so there's really no reason to even mention why you have it. Mm-hmm. They don't know that it's not supposed to be with you, so you can just feel confident in doing what you need to do with it.
Okay, one of the other items in the fine motor domain is stringing small beads. And this is somehow, for some reason, kids really like this one. Sometimes kids that you think have a hard time focusing, for some reason, really sit with you and really try on this one. And you're going to see in some of the bags look a little bit different. Some of the other Ida bags may have smaller beads, so don't panic if yours don't look exactly like this. So you want to present them with the string and the beads, and you want to show them, and a good way to remember this is you could say pinch, so you're pinching the string, push, you're pushing the bead on there, and pull. And you can make cute little sounds. You could say pinch, push, pull, whee, and give it to them or something like that. And most of the time they're going to want to try to string the beads. And they have to be able to put the bead on there to get credit for that. Okay. There is another criteria in I believe the next domain that I'm about ready to talk about where they don't necessarily have to do it, they just have to understand the concept of stringing the beads, and we'll talk about that when I get there. And then the last item to talk about, two more, on the cube structure after demonstration, you'll see that in your manual, and in the manual you'll see something that looks like this. So you're going to build your tower, and you want to see if the child could imitate what you've just done. And so some ways that you could do that is you could say, I'm going to build a house. And you could say, here's my house, here's my roof. I used to take my pen, or you could use whatever you'd like, and I say, and the little boy's going to walk through the house. Give them their 3 and say, you do it, and see if they can model what you've done. Don't be surprised, a lot of the kids want to do this and put blocks on your blocks. But the whole point of this is to model what you've just done. Okay? And then one of the last points to note on the fine motor domain is imitating the cross. And so you've already gotten them to do horizontal and vertical lines. There's techniques you could try. Everybody does it different. I would go out with other service coordinators and watch them and see what techniques they use and then try to find out what works for you. I made sounds like zip or zoom. Other people do different things. It's whatever works for you, but sometimes it's helpful to make a little sound when you're doing the lines. But when it comes to making the cross, you could go zip, zoom, or something to that effect. Or let's make a cross, whee, or whatever you want to make, whatever kind of sound you want to make, and give them and they get credit if they make a line and then they cross it. Okay, moving on to the cognitive domain. On the IDO, it's called Relationship to Inanimate Objects, but we refer to it as cognitive. That's how the child is learning. Some of the key points to look into and make sure you take note of are holding one toy and reaching for a second. This is, so while the baby, at this point, this is earlier on in the cognitive domain, while the baby is holding one toy and you present them with another toy, they reach for the second while holding that toy. They're going to get credit for that. Sometimes you could see that with the cube presentation when you're giving them the 2 cubes. One of the other key points is showing displeasure at the loss of a toy. So tell the parent what you're about to do so they don't, they realize that you're going to give their baby something and then you're about ready to take it away so they can be prepared. So you want to take it away without warning. So let's say they're playing with the baby doll in the IDA kit, or they're playing with the ball and you take the ball away. Do they seem upset when you take that away? Do they cry? Do they look at their mom like, why did she take that away from me? They'll get credit for that if they show displeasure when you take the toy away. Holding 2 toys simultaneously. That's for just a few seconds. So some of our kids may not be able to do that. They may be able to hold one, but when you present them with the second, they can't hold the second one. Then they're not going to get credit in their domain. They need to be able to hold on to 2 things at the same time for a few seconds. Uncovers the toy hidden by a cloth. There should be a cloth in your IDA bag, little felt cloth, and you could take, it works better when it's something that baby really likes. So if they're taking interest in the block or the rattle or the baby or whatever it is that they're really interested in, you want to hide it. You want to say, where did it go? And if they do this, then they get credit for that. If it's kind of by accident or you put it there and they're not even watching you, they're just kind of doing this, they don't really get credit. They have to actually know that, oh, she put something underneath there and I'm going to lift this up to see where it is. Then they'll get credit for that. sometimes it can be helpful to do 2 or 3 trials just to make sure that they understand that concept. Okay, matching 2 cubes or beating 2 toys together. The best way to do this is with the blocks, and because kids like to make noise and bang the blocks together, you could say, ooh, do this, and then present them with the blocks, and if they do this, then they get credit for that. Finds the toy hidden behind a solid screen. So with the board that's in your IDA kit, just use a file right now for an example, you want to see if they find the toy behind the solid screen. So let's say it's important if you use something that they really, really like. So if it's the rattle, the baby, the ball, the car, whatever it is that they're really interested in, you want to say, okay, see this car, see this baby, whatever it is, you're going to hide it behind the solid screen. And you want to see that the child comes around and looks to see where it is. It doesn't count if they knock the screen over or if they look over to try to find it. They have to be able to go around and find it to get credit for that. Most of the kids either try to knock it over, you'll see, but they have to be able to go around. Some of the techniques that I've used in the past are to put my face over, so kind of lean over like this, so it kind of forces them to have to go around to find it. Another one to look out for is the object imitation, and there's different ways that you could do that. You could take the spoon and the cup in your IDA kit, and you could say, I'm stirring my cereal, and you can give it to them and see if they imitate what you're doing. Scribbling with the crayon would count for that. You'd be like, I'm scribbling with the crayon, and give it to them and see if they could scribble with you. Imitate what you just did, then they would get credit for that. Okay, builds the tower of 2 cubes. And we've already talked about that in the fine motor domain. So you'll notice that some of the criteria that you're doing in other domains, or the same question is asked in other domains as well. So in the cognitive domain, this is where you also start to see them stacking blocks. They get credit for that. And in the difference between the cognitive domain stacking blocks and the fine motor domain stacking blocks is in the cognitive domain, you could help them by holding this base cube. So if they're really having difficulty and they're doing this, or trying to get it, you could say, I'll help, and you could hold that and then maybe point to it. And if they do that and you're holding it, they're going to get credit. That's the difference. In the fine motor domain, they must do that by themselves. In the cognitive domain, you could actually help them by holding it. Because they're 2 separate skills we're asking for. And the cognitive is, do they understand the concept of stacking blocks? Whereas in the fine motor domain, we want to be able to see, do they have that eye-hand coordination to be able to stack the blocks? Okay, and finding the toy or cookie under the cup. This is a tough one. There should be 2 cups in your IDA bag. They will look different depending on what bag you have. You want to make sure that they are different cups. And again, it's helpful to find something that the child really likes. So if it's the car, I used to use the car all the time because that was easy to fit under the cups. For now, I'll use the block. You're going to take the block, and you're gonna say, okay, we're gonna hide this. Here we go. And you're gonna move it around. You're gonna say, where'd it go? So, and you want to encourage the child to lift the cup and see where the toy went. Sometimes it's helpful if the child's sitting with the parent that you have the parent maybe hold one of their hands back, because the first instinct is to go like that. They're gonna do that. But if they're holding one hand back, the child will hopefully see where you hit it and try to find the cube. You want it for the child to get credit in this domain, they have to do it 2 out of 3 times. So you could do it in a different order each time. So let's say, okay, here we go. You ready? And the child goes, yeah, you found it. Okay, we're going to hide it a second time. And you may want to vary it. You may want to vary it this time. You may want to say, okay, where did it go? Where'd it go? Oh, good job. They just got it. And maybe do it a 3rd time. And if they get it the 3rd time, they get credit. So they'd have to be able to do it 2 out of 3 trials. Another item that we want to look at is, again, let's go back to the blocks really fast. In the cognitive domain, it's okay to hold the cubes when they're stacking the blocks, because it's an adaptive skill versus the motor skill that we're looking at in the fine motor domain. Removing the pellet from the bottle by dumping. So this is in the cognitive domain. So you've already seen this in the fine motor domain, so you may want to kind of cross over. once you do the pellet in the fine motor domain and they put the pellet in the bottle, that might be a good time to try to get this question answered in the cognitive domain. Do they remove the pellet from the bottle by dumping? So if you give this to them, they're like, how do you get it out? If they dump it into their hand or they dump it onto the table, they're going to get credit. If they try to do this, they're not going to get credit for that. They have to understand the concept of dumping it out. Or dumping it out. They're going to get credit for it. If they do, you'll see them do this a lot. They'll go like that. It's not going to go out, but they'll throw it out that way. They're not going to get credit for that. Okay. Now, you can demonstrate if you'd like, but they're not going to get credit for that. But it does tell you something about whether they can imitate. So that could be another one of the examples you could use on the imitation too. Look, watch me. I'm going to dump it out and give it to them. If they do it, you could use that as an example of imitation in the previous example that I gave. Placing the forms in the form board with help. So credit if they could do it with help or prompting. So this might be an example. So you're sitting with the child and you're like, here's the puzzle. And they're not quite sure. You could say, and you're like, go. And then maybe do this and you're like, turn it, turn it, turn it. They did it with help. So they're going to get credit for that. Knowing the use of 3 or more test objects. You could hold out a couple objects like the spoon, the pencil, something else, another item in the etiquette, and you could say, can you give me what you eat with? And they might give you the spoon. They would get credit. Uses objects in play to represent others, so that's more of a pretend play skill. So you could use the baby that's in the etiquette, you could use the spoon and the cup, and you could say, can you feed the baby? And give them the baby, give them the spoon, give them the cup, and see if they feed the baby. That's one of the examples. You could take the felt from the etiquette and say, oh, the baby has to go night-night. Can you put the baby night-night? And give them the baby, give them the felt, and see if they... It's really cute when you see some of the kids that do a little routine and maybe pat their tummy or sing a song or give a kiss or whatever. That counts as pretend. Okay, and places forms in form board without help. So that's where you just present the board to them. Some of these kids do really, really well. You present the board and they have no problem. If you leave it out and they do the puzzle like all by themselves without any prompting, they're going to get credit for that. Okay, understands how to string beads. So we already talked about that in the fine motor domain, but in the cognitive domain, they get credit if they just understand how to do it. They may be having difficulty doing it, but they at least understand how the process. So maybe they do that, but they can't get it out, and they hand it to you, and then you do the last part. The criteria on that one is they will get credit for that because at least they understand the concept of how to do it. They just had difficulty doing it. But in the fine motor domain, they actually have to be able to string them. So we talked about the cube structure already with the 3 blocks. Copies a pre-drawn circle. You'll see that. Let's see, Sam's got the. So you present them this, and you ask them if they can make the circle. It's kind of a tough one. Adapts to rotation of form board. So that's where they do the puzzle, and then you'll flip it and see if they can still do the puzzle when you've changed. Thank you.
It's important that you change the direction of the triangle. So if the triangle was facing down originally, you want to make sure you flip it so the triangle is now up or whatever the case may be. So everything is opposite, not just 2 of the 3.
Right. Yeah. So if they do this, they need to be able. Yeah, they need to know they've got to turn it. Okay. The cube structure from the model. We've talked about that. So you build the 3 cube structure behind the solid screen. So it was the same concept where you do this, but at this point you're going to have the solid screen. You're going to do this. And
so now we're going to talk about language and communication. Little less detailed than fine motor, gross motor, and relationship to inanimate objects. Not so detailed, more listening and communication with the family. A lot of it is pretty self-explanatory, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking to you about all the different questions, but there are a few that I think are important to kind of highlight. When you're looking at your protocol and you're going through the infancy part, it's just, normal baby sounds, the ahs, the oohs, the coos, the chuckles. Laughing is like a deep belly laugh, so not like the but the ha ha kind of laugh. Squealing is that high-pitched sound that babies make, if you're familiar. Typically it's when they're happy, but sometimes they do it when they're not. It talks about talking to toys, vocalizing spontaneously. Those are things that you'll kind of talk to the parent about. You may observe some of them, but a lot of times at those younger ages, those are things that kiddos do when they're kind of on their own in their crib, getting ready to go for a nap. So sometimes we don't get to observe all of that. So you really have to kind of talk to the parents about what kind of sounds are you hearing your baby make? Like those kinds of things, giving examples, stuff like that. Moving into like the 7 to 10 month old age range, the one I really want to highlight is it asks about playing patty cake. There's two things that I want to highlight about that. One is that you have to be culturally aware, so not all cultures play patty cake. And because it's the language domain, we're talking about, are they making any sounds or trying to sing? They're not going to say the words necessarily, but it doesn't necessarily mean the motions, so it's not about can they clap, it's more about when they hear the song, do they start to make sounds and then do the actions. So it's understanding what that song means, and it could be so big, it could be something different, and so it's important to talk to the family about their culture at this point. And again, remembering that when we're looking at language, we're looking at both expressive and receptive language. So we're looking at what a child is saying, that's expressive language, and we're looking at what a child is understanding, and that's receptive language. So we're kind of taking both pieces of the puzzle together. The IDA kind of just blops them all together. When we're concerned about speech development, typically we'll have a speech therapist or speech pathologist with us who will do a more formal assessment that really breaks the language apart. But for the purposes of the IDA for these little guys that potentially don't have language concerns, it's kind of all glopped together. So you can just kind of write one big statement on the IFSP about language. As far as the other things that I think are important, another one is indicating a want by pointing. And the protocol actually says that you are supposed to talk to the parent, let them know that you're going to put something enticing out, and hope that the child points to it and wants it. Sometimes we see pointing naturally, but that's how we can facilitate that. It's also important to note that the point actually has to be with the finger. It doesn't necessarily have to be the index finger, but it cannot be just a whole hand or arm kind of motion to what they're pointing to. It actually has to be specific and pointing as close as possible to the actual object. Because it's in an age range where we'd expect that more fine motor kind of development. Another one is something that we call using jargon. That's when you hear all those great little like ooh blah 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 kind of sounds. It sounds like they're speaking a foreign language, but what it shows us is that they're starting to understand that there are dips and valleys and differences in intonation with language, and they're really paying attention to what's around them and how people are speaking and trying to be part of that. So that's what we're kind of looking for. And then again, I feel like they're very self-explanatory as we move through the 13 to 18 month range, 18 to 24, 24 to 30. The items are the questions are pretty straightforward. And again, also in this age range, there's a really good chance that the referral came in for speech concerns, and so we're not going to be necessarily doing the IDA on the language portion. But there are two things in the 30 to 36 month range that I think are important to note. One is if a child understands two prepositions. So when we're doing that, we're going to use one of the toys from the IDA, and we're going to say, can you put the duck on the table, or can you put the duck under the table or under the chair, whatever, using in, on, basic prepositions, so that we can see if they understand that. And then the next one is responding to one comprehension question. A lot of times we use these cards that are silly, but you can use this card and you could say something like, which one do you live in? And maybe they point to the house. Or which one do you drink out of? Or something like that. And they might point to the cup, although most kids don't even know what that kind of cup is. But sometimes they do. These two cards are also cards that you can use for the identifying pictures or naming objects. You can use this, sorry. But again, they're kind of antiquated, and some kids have no idea what some of this stuff is. And it's because everything is so much more graphic now with iPads and iPhones, and so you may get more if you actually use an actual picture book, or if you actually use the tablet that they potentially play on. It's okay to use that. You don't have to, you're not bound to these cards. That's just what comes with the IDA. I tend to use just what's naturally in the environment. It's much easier, and typically we're more successful getting the child to respond. So that's basically all of the areas that I kind of wanted to hit on with language. So now I'm going to move on to self-help. And self-help is the expectations we have of children to do their own self-care and self-regulation. And it's also important to note that this varies across culture. So this again hits that cultural sensitivity and kind of understanding different cultures and how they handle independence when it comes to this area. So not all cultures are comfortable with children being independent in their self-care and self-regulation. So it's important, in my opinion, that we take note of that. And if a child doesn't have an opportunity to do such a thing, like feeding themselves, for instance, with utensils, then it's not fair for us to count that against them because they haven't ever had the opportunity to do so. So we need to be aware of, are we concerned about that possible development, or are they successfully feeding themselves as they would culturally? Some cultures don't use utensils at all, so it wouldn't be fair for us to ask a family that comes from a culture that doesn't use utensils, how's your son using a spoon? Like, that doesn't make any sense and could potentially cause them to feel like they're failing as parents, and that is not what we're here to do. So it's kind of, we just kind of need to keep all of that in mind when we're thinking about self-help and how we kind of address those areas. But, self-help in terms of baby stuff is really just soothing, so sucking on their hands, and that carries over for several different age ranges. And then kind of how a child is manipulating through their environment to get what they need. And then obviously we get into feeding and even walking alone with some signs of pleasure. That's considered a self-help or self-regulation skill. The one where I think we run into the most challenge is in the 18 to 24 month range when we talk about, does a child handle a cup well? When we're asking that question, we're actually referring to an open cup. Now, my experience, and I know Kristen's experience, is that most families don't give children at this age open cups because they don't want to clean up whatever happens afterwards. kids are messy and get excited and tend to dump. So I always talk to parents about, that's okay. I gave my kids sippy cups or straw cups as well. But if you were outside or in the bathtub and you gave them a cup with a tiny bit of water, what would happen? And so maybe the family's never done that, and so you give them an idea and then you can check back with them. But sometimes kids will just do it naturally, like, oh no, they don't drink from a cup, and then they'll walk over and pick up their parent's cup, drink from it, and put it back down. And you're like, okay, so they can. They just don't have the opportunity. So it's just kind of something to keep in mind. The other one that I don't think I've never had a child do at the 24 to 30 month range is give me their full name when I ask them. When we say full name, we expect first name and last name. We don't get that very often. I've never had that. I have children that can tell me their first name. If they do that, I give them credit. Again, this is also tricky because sometimes kids are coming in with a language delay, so they're not speaking. So we have to then think, okay, from a developmental standpoint, am I worried about their self-help skills because they can't tell me their name because they have a language delay? Not really. So we need to be conscientious of how we score that and recognizing that potentially no services or additional support is needed. That child is doing fine. If we provide them with the language support they need, eventually that will come. But it's not necessarily a priority for us. So those are kind of the key things I think of when it comes to self-help. Now we'll move on to relationship to people, feelings, states, and emotions, and coping. I'm just going to kind of do a general conversation about how important this area of development is. We actually use a different assessment tool now for specifically looking at social emotional development, and that's called the DAISY-2. So you'll be receiving that training as well, separate from this training. But what is important to remember is that social and emotional development are two separate things. Social is how we're interacting with others, how we're interacting with our parents, our peers, strangers, and emotional is really how we manage how we're feeling and how we demonstrate that. And you, as you're going through your training here at the Regional Center, I'm sure you're getting a lot of training on social emotional development because it's a priority for the state right now. What we know from research is that strong social emotional development and support is how we see kids kind of blossom and grow in all areas of development. So if they're getting what they need in those relationships that they have from their family or their peers or whatever the situation is, if it's foster care, wherever these children are, if their social and emotional development is being cared for and you know, I don't know, just matured and nurtured, that these children can then fill in the gaps in these other areas that we're seeing. So it's a big push for us. It's been a passion of mine, which is why I kind of just spiral on this weird tangent, so I apologize. But it's just really important to remember that when we're looking at those emotions, even though we're using a different assessment tool than the one you're getting trained on today, how we take into consideration what those emotions look like. And potentially a parent will describe something like a tantrum behavior as very intense and very hard to handle, when what we know from a developmental perspective is it's just very typical, especially if we add in potential speech delay or whatever the other pieces might be. And so it's our job when we're there and talking about this to kind of help families recognize the strengths that they already have and what they're giving their children and the strengths that their children are showing and helping them understand. Because sometimes when you're in the moment, and I can speak from experience as a parent, I do a really good job talking to other parents about how to address behavior and emotions, and sometimes when I'm home, like when my children were toddlers and they would have a tantrum, I would forget everything that I know. and you react to this situation. So it's important to help families recognize that that's normal and natural, and it's what happens, but you can just work through it and get there. So that's kind of what our job is in these areas. There is the specific area for coping behavior, which some people don't even do. But I find it very helpful to look at, as far as I add it to the IFSP in the adaptive area, because it talks about doing things for themselves, recovering from small hurts. So it kind of talks about how they're able to kind of adapt to things that happen to them. So I think that it's helpful information. So even though we're not doing this assessment anymore, it still gives us the opportunity to gain more information for the IFSP and to develop social emotional goals and adaptive goals if need be. And I think it is important that there should always be some kind of social emotional outcome, family outcome on the IFSP, which again is part of additional training, but it's just a very important area, and we just need to really pay attention. Okay. So now that we've kind of talked about the assessment and all the different things that we think you need to remember or know in more detail, we're going to get to the nitty-gritty of kind of scoring and calculating age and whatnot. So the first thing we're going to talk about is calculating the age of the child that you're assessing. And you could easily just do the math in your head and go, oh, he's about 24 months old or something. But we actually need to be very specific. So when we're looking at age and calculating that, the things that you need to remember is a year always equals 12 months, which is pretty obvious. A month either equals 4 weeks or 30 days. A week is always 7 days, and that one's pretty obvious. And then the other two things to keep in mind are that we consider a full-term pregnancy 40 weeks, and that we have to adjust for prematurity if a child is born at 36 weeks of gestation or less. Okay, so now I'm just going to give you an example of how we kind of write it out. And the beauty is that the new protocol that we use actually has it broken down for you very specifically, so it's really easy. As long as you can remember the math piece, it's pretty easy to kind of do it. And I got into social work because I'm not good at math, but this is pretty self-explanatory, I think. So we'll just kind of practice it and go from here. So I'm just going to give you these since we're using this. So there's this year, month, day. This is the order in which it's written. And then you always do today's date first. So it would be 18 July, and today's the 20th. And then I'm just gonna pick a date and the birth date that I have. This child was born in 2015 in November and on the 14th. Okay, so now we subtract. This one's very self-explanatory, right? But here you can't take 7 away from 11, so I'm going to need to borrow. So I can't just borrow simply. I have to borrow an entire year because that's the column I have. So this becomes 17, and then I'm going to add 12 months to this, so this actually becomes 19. Right? And then I'll do the math. And now this is simple, so it's 17 minus 15. So this child is 2 years, 8 months, 6 days. So we're going to convert this to months. So this is actually this child, because everything's in months, so this child will be 32 months. Okay? I'm going to give you guys an example. So let's take this same kiddo, and I'm just going to flip the page. And let's say that we have to take a different kiddo, sorry. But we're going to do one that where we have to adjust for prematurity. Okay, so again, year, month, day. Today is July 20th, 2018. We're gonna say this kiddo was born in 2017 in June on the 19th. Okay? So this child is 1 year, 1 month, 1 day. That's convenient. But this child was born at 32 weeks. So we're going to do some quick math over here. You can do this in your head, but I'm just writing it out so you see it. So this is a full-term pregnancy. This is when that child was born. So we're going to do the math. So this child was born 8 weeks early. So we need to divide, because we don't have weeks up here, we need to divide this by 4 to determine how many months and days, right? So pretty self-explanatory, but just so you see that if you are like me and need to see things visually, you can do all of the different pieces. So this child was born 2 months early. So I'm gonna, if this is the adjustment right here, so I'm gonna put a 2 right here, and then I'm gonna do the subtraction. Since there's no days early, this just carries down from the 1, but since 2 is greater than 1, we can't subtract it, we're gonna have to borrow again. So this becomes a 0, this becomes 13, because we added 12 months. We're gonna subtract 13 minus 2, so this kiddo is adjusted age 11 months, 1 day. So when we're doing, so this is their adjusted age. This would be what we would call their chronological age. So when we're doing the IDA assessment, or any assessment that we're doing, we're looking for the child to be showing us developmental skills between the ages around 11 months and 13 months. So we're looking at, if we were expecting that child to be showing us age appropriate or typical development for them, they would be doing skills somewhere around their adjusted age or in between their adjusted age and their chronological age.
So if you look at your IDA scoring sheet on pages 8 and 9, this is what the scoring sheet looks like. Okay, and so it breaks it up in all the different domains that we've reviewed up to now. And as far as like the actual scoring itself, your manager will be having you shadow other service coordinators. You'll be going out with them. You'll be watching them, observing them as they're doing their assessments with their clients, and that they are doing the scoring. So that would be a good time to sit with that service coordinator, even when they return to the office and they come back and they're scoring it, they're looking at it, to sit with them and have them show you how they score it. And you'll see them do that while they're at the visit as well, because they're going to probably review that with the parent. They'll probably review each domain and say, well, what we saw today in the gross motor domain, we see that your child was functioning in the 24 to 30 month level, as an example. So you'll see a little bit of that, and then when you come back to the office, you could speak with that service coordinator about that, about the visit, about the assessment, about how they scored it, and then you could always go to your manager with questions as well. But some of the basics regarding the scoring. So if you are presenting the items to the child, and so let's give the blocks as an example, and you show them the blocks and you say, can you stack the blocks? And you see them stack the blocks. You're going to put a plus in the scoring, on the scoring sheet. And that's again on pages 8 and 9 of
The plus would be in the, next to the item you actually had them do. So you would put a plus in the box.
Carrying over.
Yeah.
If you give them the blocks and you say stack the blocks and they don't do it, they're going to get a minus in the box on the page right by the criteria that says stack blocks. If they're just not responding to you, the child is shy, they're just not wanting to participate, but your gut instinct and you feel that they probably could do it if you stuck with it longer, or you could say to the parent, have you seen your child do this? And blocks just like this, I say, oh, she does this all the time when you're not here. Then if you feel that the parent is an accurate reporter, and sometimes at this point you may be there long enough to kind of know, is this parent an accurate reporter? I would take their word for it and give them an R+, meaning the behavior was reported by the care provider that the child could do it, you just didn't see it. Or the other example would be is if you say the child's not responding to you, and you ask the parent, do they do this when I'm not here? And they say, oh no, they don't do that with blocks. Then you can give them an R minus. If the child is starting to do the skill, they're not quite getting it yet, you would give them an emerging in the box. And that's important to note on your score sheet, because you may take the score sheet out again 6 months later as you do your 6-month review, and that's a good one to go back to. Hey, last time when I was here, he wasn't quite doing the blocks yet, but I see him doing it now. Look, that's great. He's made progress since the last time that I've been out. So it's important to note that it was an emerging, and it could be helpful to even include that on your IFSP in the strengths page. I've done that at times too, just to kind of let them know that skill's just about there. It's not quite there yet, but it's emerging. It's an emerging skill. If you give the child the items and they absolutely refuse to do so, then you would put a refuse, an REF, in the box on the score sheet. Okay, or no opportunity. So it could be they just haven't been exposed to that particular skill. You might want to write in the box that there was no opportunity to learn that.
And that's not an official IDA scoring verbiage, but it's something that a lot of us use, and I particularly use it. Going back to kind of what I was talking about with self-help, sometimes they just have never had the opportunity. So I think it's important to note that, because it tells us something about where we can help the family make a change, or where we can be more culturally aware. So then Kristen mentioned it earlier when she was kind of going over the gross motor, fine motor, and cognitive domains. There are items, and you'll see it across all of the 8 domains, that are what we call cross-referenced items. So they'll tell you basically to see a different item. So for example, item 18 says string small beads, and in parentheses it says, and that's a fine motor skill, and in parentheses it says RI 20. So if you refer over to relationship to inanimate objects 20, it is understanding how to string beads. So if a child actually strings the beads, then we could intuitively give them credit for understanding how to do that. So it saves you a little bit of time. But again, as Kristen noted, sometimes it's different, right? So for fine motor, they actually have to string the beads. You could actually give them credit for just trying to string them under the understanding. So you have to understand what that cross-referencing means. But basically, it's items that have that are similar in administration or in the developmental competency required. And for us, I think the goal is to help us realize that the interrelatedness of development and how everything kind of ties together, kind of going back to that, what we talked about social emotional development. Additionally, on your protocol, you're going to see that there are items that have stars next to them, so little like asterisks. These starred items are kind of specialized to the IDA. We don't necessarily use the information about the starred items the way the assessment tool intends, but that's because the population that we're assessing and the delays that we potentially see are not kind of why the IDA was created. So it's important to note that the starred item basically is an item that the developers of the IDA have determined assess neurological integrity and generally accepted milestones, as well as emotional development arising from good enough parenting. So that's a lot to take in, and to kind of, those are a lot of things to kind of think about. So for example, one of the starred items is holding a crayon with their finger, so using an adult grasp. So for us, we would say, okay, so this is just something that typically children do between 24 and 30 months. And also it tells us that they're being exposed to coloring, which at this age we would hope that their parents are doing. For purposes of this assessment, they talk about competent and not competent. So if a child is not doing the starred items at their age range, the IDA assessment itself would consider a child not competent. But for us, we really use it more as a marker skill, and it's just used purely for information for us, something that we're going to watch down the road. We want to make sure that either the family is given the strategies that they need to teach their child the next developmental skill or learn what comes next developmentally, because not everybody has that information, or is it something that we need to watch to see if the child can't fill that gap, if we need to provide additional support or services. So again, those starred items are purely for informational purposes for us as early intervention service coordinators. At this point, we have covered all of the assessment, and so this would be a great time. Hopefully you were, as you were watching this video, you were kind of jotting things down that maybe didn't make sense to you or that you have questions about, that you can refer to your managers with. And again, as Kristen indicated, you'll be set up with some of your coworkers to go do observation and be able to practice. I know each of us does that a little differently, so depending on who you shadow, kind of your experience will be different. So it's really good to kind of work with all the different people that you have the opportunity to work with. In the PowerPoint that you guys have access to reference, and that has been kind of shadowed in with us, there's some information about eligibility. So we are using this assessment to determine if a child meets eligibility under the developmental delay category. So in order for that child to be eligible, they need to be showing a 33% delay in one area of development. And there is a chart that you can refer to. You'll probably get a much better copy of it, but we put it in the PowerPoint just so you had access to it. That does the math for you, so you don't have to determine what 33% is. You can just look at the form and it tells you. But that's really why we're doing the IDA, not only just to put information, because we are required to provide that information, but also so that we can determine if there's an area of delay. So thank you for watching.